Jason Miller was suddenly hit with a $500 fine for his 2-year-old shed, an outrage that felt completely unfair. Karen Wilson, the neighborhood's meticulous enforcer, seemed determined to humiliate him and prove he was a bad neighbor. But what she didn't know was that Jason's boss just happened to be the HOA president, a twist that changed everything. And just wait until you see how this clever move turned the tables, restoring justice in a way no one expected. I'm Jason Miller, and I've always considered myself the kind of neighbor who follows the rules, lends a hand when needed, and tries to keep the peace. In our small, tree-lined suburb, the HOA isn't just a group that enforces rules. They're the silent guardians of order. I respected that. I mowed my lawn on schedule, kept my flower beds neat, and never let my trash cans sit out past the allowed time. I believed that being a good neighbor meant avoiding trouble and respecting the shared space we all called home. That all changed the day I met Karen Wilson in her full, relentless glory. If you know the type, you know her. She was the kind of person who measured things with a ruler, inspected every detail, and kept a mental list of everyone's shortcomings. Karen had a reputation around the neighborhood for being meticulous and, frankly, intimidating. People whispered about her in passing, sharing stories of minor violations she'd pounced on and the fines she'd imposed. I thought I was immune. After all, I had always played by the rules. But I was about to learn how wrong I was. It started on a bright Thursday morning. I was outside my house, adjusting the little garden path that led to my backyard, when Karen appeared seemingly out of nowhere. She walked up my driveway with that familiar, sharp look in her eyes, holding a crisp piece of paper in her hand. Her heels clicked against the concrete in a rhythm that somehow made my stomach tighten. I tried to smile politely, thinking maybe she wanted to borrow sugar or ask about the neighborhood meeting, but the smile quickly froze on my face. "Jason," she said, her voice flat, precise, and with no hint of friendliness, "your shed violates the rules. That'll be a $500 fine." I froze. The words hit me like a cold gust of wind. My small wooden shed, the one I'd built carefully 2 years ago, measuring every inch to make sure it fit perfectly within my property lines, was suddenly an offense? A violation? My mind raced as I struggled to comprehend what I was hearing. 2 years of compliance, 2 years of quiet satisfaction with a backyard project I was proud of, and now I was being accused of breaking the rules. Shock gave way almost immediately to anger. My heart thumped in my chest, each beat echoing a mix of disbelief and rising fury. The unfairness of it all. It wasn't just the fine itself. It was the audacity. The way she delivered the judgment as if I were a criminal rather than a neighbor who had done everything right. I felt my hands clench at my sides, my jaw tighten, and the familiar warmth of indignation spread through me. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to explain that the shed had been there longer than many other structures in the neighborhood, that it complied with all the measurements, that I'd checked with the HOA years ago. But her expression shut down every word before it could escape. Karen's eyes didn't just stare. They judged. They scrutinized. They condemned. It was as if I were on trial, and she was the prosecutor, jury, and executioner all at once. For a few minutes, I just stood there, frozen by a combination of shock and rising anger. Every neighbor I passed in my mind's eye, the ones I'd smiled at, helped with packages, or waved to across fences, suddenly felt like witnesses to this injustice. The thought that someone could wield power in such a cold, arbitrary way made my chest tighten further. I realized that this wasn't going to be a simple conversation or a small correction. It was the beginning of a struggle I hadn't expected, a test of patience, resolve, and ultimately, justice. As Karen turned and walked away, the paper still in her hand like a banner of triumph, I felt a quiet but burning determination ignite inside me. This wasn't over. I wasn't just going to stand there and accept it. My heart still raced, but now with a sharper edge. Anger, raw and focused, had taken root, and I knew I had to find a way to confront this head-on. Not just for me, but for the principle that fairness mattered, even in the smallest corners of our little suburb. After that initial confrontation with Karen, I thought maybe it was just a misunderstanding, something that could be cleared up with calm reasoning. I approached her the next day, documents in hand, showing that my shed fully complied with HOA regulations. I even listed several neighbors who had nearly identical structures. I tried to speak politely, even a little humorously, hoping to diffuse the tension. Karen, I double-checked everything. This shed has been here 2 years and it follows every rule. Look at the neighbors' yards, they all have similar setups. But she didn't even blink. Her expression remained tight, her eyes sharp and unforgiving. She waved my arguments away as if they were invisible, insisting that the fine stood. I could feel a cold frustration building, like a weight pressing on my chest. I'd thought logic and reason were enough, but apparently they weren't. Karen had decided in her mind that I was wrong, and she wasn't going to change her mind. Then came the relentless inspections. Every morning, without fail, she appeared on my property, sometimes at the earliest light, armed with a clipboard and a camera. She photographed the shed from multiple angles, crouched to check measurements, scribbled notes in a way that felt almost ceremonial. It was as if she were building a case against me personally, proof that I was the neighborhood's problem. Every click of her camera made my stomach twist, and every glance from her sharp, assessing eyes felt like a judgment passed in secret court. It wasn't just the inspections, it was how visible it all was. Other residents began noticing her visits. I could see their curious glances as they walked their dogs, jogged past, or watered their gardens. I felt exposed, like my private backyard had become a stage for someone else's authority performance. Every time I stepped outside, I felt tension coil in my shoulders, my steps cautious, my words guarded. Even a simple moment of enjoying my own garden seemed impossible. The powerlessness was the worst part. No matter what I did, Karen seemed to be everywhere, silently reminding me that I was under scrutiny. I tried talking to the HOA board, sending polite emails asking for clarification. Each response was slow, vague, or dismissive. The system that I had always respected now felt like a wall I couldn't climb, an invisible force aligned against me. It was humbling and humiliating to realize that in this small dispute over a shed, I had become a target of persistent personal attention. At night, I lay awake thinking about it, replaying every interaction, every glance, every note Karen had made. It was exhausting. I felt my confidence erode, replaced by a growing sense of injustice. Something that should have been simple, a minor clarification, a small rule check, had spiraled into something deeply uncomfortable. I felt trapped in my own home, haunted by the idea that a single person's insistence could make daily life stressful and public perception turn against me. I wasn't angry anymore, at least not entirely. That initial fury had transformed into a heavy, simmering ache of frustration and anxiety. I had to live with this tension constantly, walking a careful line between compliance and resistance, trying to keep my pride while feeling increasingly powerless. The small dispute over a shed had grown into a personal ordeal, a test of patience and resilience I hadn't expected, one that seemed to stretch endlessly day after day. After weeks of relentless scrutiny and daily stress, I needed a break from the constant tension. One evening, I met with my longtime friend Mark at our favorite local cafe. I poured out the whole ordeal, Karen's endless inspections, her judgmental stares, the mounting fines, and the way it seemed to affect not just me, but how everyone in the neighborhood now looked at my property. Mark listened carefully, nodding, and then asked questions I hadn't even considered, like whether I had tried approaching the HOA board or documenting every interaction. As we talked, I casually mentioned something I hadn't shared before. "You know," I said, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly, "my boss at work is actually Stephen Harris. That's the HOA president himself." Mark's eyebrows shot up. "Wait," he said, leaning forward. "The HOA president is your boss? That's huge. Maybe you should remind Karen of that. Politely, of course, just so she understands who's really making decisions here." His suggestion lingered in my mind as we parted ways. The next morning, I felt a cautious sense of hope. Maybe there was a way to regain control without escalating things aggressively. I decided to invite Karen to a local cafe for a calm, face-to-face conversation. I wanted to approach this strategically, keeping my tone even and professional. I rehearsed what I would say, imagining her reaction, and prepared to present the facts clearly. I knew that the way I delivered the message would matter more than the message itself. When Karen arrived, she carried that familiar air of confidence and smugness, the kind that had been so infuriating during the past weeks. She settled into the chair across from me, coffee in hand, ready to lecture, or so I assumed. I let her talk for a few moments, nodding politely, maintaining a calm demeanor, and listened to her list of complaints about the shed. Her tone was precise, formal, and somewhat condescending, as if she had rehearsed this speech hundreds of times. Then I leaned back slightly and spoke, choosing my words carefully. "Karen," I said, my voice calm and steady, "you know Stephen Harris, the HOA president. He's my boss." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, her expression shifted. First, her face went pale, as if the wind had been knocked out of her. "Oh, sir." Then her eyes widened, and I could see very clearly her pride and certainty begin to crumble. She was no longer in control of the situation. Suddenly, she was faced with a reality she hadn't anticipated. The smug confidence she had carried for weeks dissolved in seconds. It was as though a weight had lifted off my shoulders. I could feel the tension I had carried for weeks begin to ease, replaced by a quiet, growing sense of possibility. This was the turning point, the moment where hope entered the story, where the impossible seemed just a little more possible. For the first time in days, I felt that the scales could be balanced, that fairness might be restored, and that the endless anxiety might finally have an end. In that brief, charged silence across the table, I realized how much power there is in calm authority, in patience, and in strategic action. It wasn't about confrontation or aggression. It was about timing, clarity, and the subtle shift that changes everything. The hopelessness of the past weeks began to give way to anticipation, the knowledge that perhaps, finally, the right move could bring resolution. Hope had returned. After that conversation at the cafe, a remarkable change occurred. Karen didn't approach me again about the shed. She stopped showing up every morning with her clipboard, her camera, and her pointed notes. The relentless inspection ceased, and a heavy tension that had shadowed my days began to lift. It was a relief that I hadn't realized I needed so badly until it was gone. The air around my property felt lighter. My backyard felt like my own space again, and even the simplest tasks, like watering the flowers or sweeping the patio, felt normal instead of fraught with anxiety. News of the incident traveled through the neighborhood quickly. Neighbors I'd waved to, nodding across fences, now stopped to congratulate me. "Jason, you handled that so well," they said. I don't know if I could have stayed calm like that. I realized that my measured approach, calmly presenting the facts and maintaining dignity under pressure, had made a lasting impression. People admired not only the outcome, but the way it was achieved. I had expected some relief, yes, but the recognition from those around me added a profound sense of fulfillment that I hadn't anticipated. The shed itself remained exactly where it had always been. Its wooden panels glowed warmly in the afternoon sun, a quiet symbol of resilience and fairness. But the shed was more than just a structure. It had become a symbol of patience, knowledge, and the subtle power that comes from acting thoughtfully rather than impulsively. I understood now that strength doesn't always come from confrontation or from using authority aggressively. True strength can lie in knowledge, clarity, and the calm confidence to stand your ground when it matters most. Reflecting on the experience, I realized that the story wasn't just about me or about a shed. It was about principles, about fairness, and about the ways in which we respond to challenges. Injustice, when confronted calmly and wisely, can be overcome. The ordeal had tested my patience, my resilience, and my understanding of how to navigate complex social dynamics. And in that test, I had found not only a solution, but also a lesson that I could carry forward in life. Even Karen herself seemed to change, though subtly. There was a visible shift in how she interacted with other neighbors, a tempered approach that suggested she had learned more than I had anticipated. She began to respect not only the rules she enforced, but also the people behind those rules, their motivations, their patience, and their ability to act with integrity. In a way, the conflict had become an unexpected lesson for her as well, reminding everyone that authority is most effective when balanced with respect and understanding. As I looked around my neighborhood in the weeks that followed, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Life had returned to its rhythm, calm and predictable, yet enriched by the experiences we had all shared. The shed remained, the tension lifted, and the lessons lingered. Confidence, patience, and the quiet power of knowledge can transform even the most stressful situations into moments of triumph. I realized that sometimes the most meaningful victories are not the loudest. They are the ones that restore balance, inspire others, and reaffirm that dignity and fairness will ultimately prevail.